So, again, thank you all for taking time to be with us on this Thursday. So, whether it's morning or afternoon or evening, welcome. And we are so glad that you're here. I'm Rebecca Wilson, and I serve on MCC staff on the community development team as the church support and development coordinator. And today is brought to you, some of my colleagues and I. We were hearing, if you ever wonder if we read your emails and listen to your comments and feedback, the answer is yes. And the reason, part of why we are here today is because we were getting questions and comments and wonderings from people about how questions about membership and about how has COVID and the pandemic changed the ways that we have think about membership. And so it started with the question more about bylaws and procedures, and then it kind of grew to this really exciting conversation about what does it even mean to be a member of a church? What does it mean for the member? What does it mean for the church itself? And so today is really just going to be a time of conversation. We have some guest panelists they're going to introduce themselves in just a moment, but that's why we are here today. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Again, we ask that you keep yourself on mute as this cuts back on feedback. There'll be an opportunity towards the end, if we have time, to take questions, but throughout the webinar, if something comes up for you, please put that question or that idea in the chat box, and Reverend Wanda will be monitoring it. And we can either, if it goes along with the question that is on the table, we can add it or we can save it until the end. Also, just something in the bottom, depending on what type of device you're on, Zoom has some reaction buttons. And so down at the bottom or on the side, there'll be something that says chat and participants. But if you go to reactions, you'll see some different emojis and faces. So if you hear something that really excites you or that's really interesting or that you're just curious about, go ahead and try those reactions. Maybe someone says something that you think is just absolutely wonderful. You can click that hand clap that I just put in mine. And that's just another way to stay engaged. And so I'm going to ask Reverend Kathy to open us in prayer, and then we're going to meet the panelists today.
Thanks, Rebecca. Let's join our hearts and our spirits in prayer. Gracious God, thank you for this time. Thank you for the spirit of inquiry. Thank you for conversations and questions and solutions and connections. I pray that our time would be rich, and I pray that you would continue to make yourself known to each of us in particular and amazing ways. We pray these things in the many names that you are known by. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And so before we introduce the panelists, I just want to take a moment. I know that some of my staff colleagues are here. And so we have Reverend Kathy, who is our vocational leadership coordinator. She's waving at you. Reverend Wanda Floyd, who works with our emerging churches and spiritual communities. I saw Reverend Stephanie Phillips. She is our laity development and diversity and inclusion coordinator. I see Reverend Dr. Karma Amos, who is our resource team lead. And did I miss anyone? I think I saw Reverend Hector. And I also think I see at least one of our current elders, Reverend Elder Maxwell. So thank you all for being here. And now—
And Elder Gowdy is with us also.
Oh,
Elder Gowdy.
Yes, thank you. Elder Gowdy, thank you for being here. We're so glad to have you.
And Mike is here. Mike's here too.
Oh, and Mike Hassey. See, that's what happens when you have so many people that they don't fit on one screen. You miss some of the faces. So thank you for that. So I think what we're going to do now, we're going to jump right into our panelists. And so I'm going to ask each of our guests today to just tell you who they are, where they're from in terms of their physical geographic location, but also their ministry setting. And then I'm going to ask them in 2 minutes or less to tell us one thing about membership that really excites them. So I'm going to start with Reverend Lori.
Thank you. I'm Reverend Lori Hatcher-Vera. I'm the senior pastor of MCC of the Spirit in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Our church is located in what they refer to as the light industrial area of Harrisburg. We are in the city of Harrisburg by just a few blocks. So if you went north just a few blocks of us, you'd be one of the townships instead of the city. We have 64 members, and that number has probably stayed steady for now for almost 5 years. Although the number has been made up of all, it seems like someone leaves, someone else comes, so that number just kind of stays steady. What excites me about membership, probably not anything as much as seeing people getting engaged in ministry. That's probably
Yeah.
much more of my excitement than worrying about membership, but we've dealt with that issue. So
Great. And I'm excited to get to this engagement question as we move forward today. Lucille, will you introduce yourself?
So hi, I am Lucille Shannon. I am also at MCC of the Spirit in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My role there is I am the lay minister of missions. So I am engaged in the conversation of reimagining what missions is and looking specifically at vocational missions and being a missionary in your local setting and encouraging and being salt and light wherever God has placed us in life. So I am hosting a monthly group where we discuss that and book discussions and just trying to start a conversation about that. Membership excites me because I also want to reimagine membership. Just like I'm reimagining missions, I would love to reimagine membership. I'm always excited to see new people come to the church and be excited to be members. And then I'm always kind of sad to see when I see their excitement wane as they stay members in the church. So I would love to reimagine membership to help individuals to stay excited about their church long into their membership.
Great. Well, we're so glad to have you a part of this conversation today. Reverend Dwayne.
Hi, my name is Dwayne. I'm the senior pastor of Metropolitan Community Church of Washington, D.C. We're kind of halfway between the Capitol and the White House, within walking distance. And it's great to be where we can go to the Supreme Court and protest or whatever we need to do. So thankfully, we've got some folks that occasionally keep me out of trouble on that front. And not always. So, so it's an exciting place to be and at times a challenging place to be. My other hat is I've now served under 3 mayors on the Mayor's Interfaith Council. And it's great to do interfaith work, work around responding to hate crimes and some of those things and standing together as faith, a variety of faith communities. So very excited about that other hat as well. And membership, what excites me about membership is seeing lives jump off a list into places of, I love the word engagement that was used. It's hard for me to keep it to one focus. I would say you can't have membership without community. Membership is about belonging. I think of the word remember, and I think of it as re-member. It's becoming again a part of who you were all along and discovering it in new ways. And the lost parts of ourselves being found through each other, faith in the midst. So, and I could go on, but I'll kind of leave it at that with that word remember.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Can't wait to hear more from you. And we have a special treat today. We have SJ and Andrew. Will you introduce us yourselves to us?
Hi, so we are SJ and Andrew. We co-pastor the church MCC Brighton in Brighton, United Kingdom, for those not familiar with the geography. Our church is sort of described, I think I described it on a form or something that Rebecca picked up as, we almost have 2 communities that work in conjunction together. We have a settled, housed community that has been meeting online since the pandemic began, but prior to that was the engine house behind the rest of the ministry, which is a congregation of homeless, vulnerably housed, transient, skateboarders, and random families in the park who keep coming back week after week. And we do our ministry out in the street. So we divide our work so that I primarily look after the cohort that is online and securely housed, shall we say. The more traditional congregation with more traditional expectations of pastoral care, and Andrew focuses on the slightly more transient community. Our membership role reflects that. So our membership role is very small compared to our attendance, because those who are skateboarders and homeless, only 2 or 3 of them at any point in time are willing to go through a process to become a member and then attend consistently enough to actually make membership meaningful for them. But many will come, stick around, do a huge amount of work, and then disappear 3 months later on a grand walking tour of wherever they've decided to go off and be nomadic. It's a very interesting scenario, and what excites me about membership is that I get to watch people become really excited about their church, regardless of whether they tick the box for MCC membership or not. Before the pandemic, we did a street church in another town, which we haven't quite got back to yet. And we went there one week, and I remember someone saying, you can't stop us doing this. This is church. About us showing up with our sound system and biscuits and noodles. And this was a community of, well, they were about to be moved on by the police for drinking in public. Shall we put it that way? But this is church. Want to add anything?
No, pretty much covers.
Well,
It's grown a lot since we started, because we started from my work with the homeless, and Sundays, it took years to get into the skateboarding crowd, but now we're regularly getting over 100 people just drop by. Many of them come every week now just to say hello and see how we're doing.
And they stop and stand through the service to watch it broadcast.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're just wandering past. They actually stop and stand for the service.
It's not a comfortable place, I'm going to show you.
that's so. I want to hear more today about your outreach and your work with the skateboard community. So as we move through the questions, if there's an opportunity to share more about that, I'm sure others are intrigued by that. So one of the things that so in preparation for today, I was trying to do some reading and find out what the different voices around throughout Christianity are saying about membership, and Google searching and different things. And what I found was a lot of things about how to become a member, like what the process is, what's required in terms of a class. I found good amount of information about what's expected of a member once you become a member. I found lots and lots of information about discipline of members, but what I didn't really find was just the whole idea of membership as a whole. Like, what does it mean to be a member of something, particularly a member of a church? And so I just wanted to start with that question of what does church membership, what does that mean to you? What does that mean in your community? And then sort of an add-on to that, and feel free to answer any or all parts of this, but this question of virtual membership or traditional membership, and is it really an either or is it both, or is virtual membership? Is there really a distinction? So anything about those questions that you want to share about what is membership and this whole idea of virtual membership and traditional, are those really distinctions that we need to make, or are we talking about the same thing? So feel free to jump in and answer that.
Wow, Rebecca, that was a lot of questions. But I'm going to jump in with traditionally, membership has been a point in which someone has decided, I am going to align myself with a particular church congregation and be engaged with that congregation, but also take responsibility for voting things and being part of the approving things like bylaws and budgets and all that kind of fiduciary stuff that church has to do with. Probably my vision of membership because of COVID and people moving has greatly changed. Membership is not so much just ticking your name off of a list, but we had to, with COVID, we had to look at, I can tell you when COVID started, the first thing we did was, okay, we're not doing any kind of membership review. You know, the bylaws call for us to do a membership review every year and check to see who's not showing up and who's not being supportive of the church and who's not engaged, and send them letters about, hey, you're not engaged anymore, and realize that that's just not going to cut it right now when you have a good, number one, your doors are closed because of COVID. And number two, even when you started bringing back and opening your doors back up, there were still lots of people who are not comfortable being in a group of people. And they wanted to, you know, we had the blessing of almost as soon as we closed our door, the next week we had a phone out there with a camera, and we are filming and Facebooking and live streaming our service. And a lot of that was thankfully to Lucille and his work behind the camera. So we didn't have a gap. So those who were home were still able to watch us. But after a couple of years, we had to think about, okay, so what are we going to do about membership? And this was not an overnight decision. This is something that I thought about for months and months and months, and prayed about, and we talked about, and tried to figure out what we as a church were going to do about membership. And COVID wasn't the only factor in our decision. We had a number of members move away, and they were moving into parts of the country where there wasn't an MCC. And so for them to move into the area where they needed to move to, there would have been a disconnect. And so we wanted to help them to maintain that connection with MCCs. And so that was also behind our work of trying to figure out, how do we redo membership? And we realized that a lot of what we have to do has to incorporate both the on-site and the live stream. So we do just about everything here now, both as a hybrid. So we do Bible study as a hybrid. We have done board meetings as a hybrid. We have done our annual congregational meetings as a hybrid. And by that, I mean both in person and live streaming it, and made it so that people at home could even interact with us. So I would have one person just watching a screen in case someone's got a question, and I'm so busy talking like I'm doing right now that I don't see that someone else might have a hand raised. So you had to make provisions, and I had to be willing to rearrange how I would look at things. You know, I was let me move around the chancel person. Well, when you're doing online, you can't do that, especially if you have a stationary camera. So you had to kind of reconfigure out even how I was moving during a sermon, so that those at home weren't just seeing an empty pulpit, you know, which is not very inviting to them. So there was a lot of rethinking about how we're going to do this. And we keep revisioning how we're doing. We've gone from starting with Lucille and I sharing our phones to do this, to now we have 3 stationary computer cameras all attached to one device, so that we can press a button and call up different cameras with a whole audio mixer just in that device that is used just for live streaming. We live stream to Facebook, and probably within the next 2 weeks, we'll be live streaming to YouTube at the same time. So it's really looking at a lot of different things. But what we realized as we were figuring out about membership is that we had to do that differently. We couldn't just say, okay, you have to be at church X number of times a year to be considered a member. So we could say, okay, so we still want to have some attendance and accountability, because part of that is membership, being accountable to your attendance, be accountable to serving in the community and in the church. So we changed things and we said to them, you can be a member from home. When you're watching on Facebook, put your name in the comments so we know you're there.
Mhm.
So each week I go through, so our service is on Sunday, usually by Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning, I go through Facebook and I write down everyone who was in attendance. And we put that in the attendance with the rest of the attendance of those who were there in person. I have come up with, so 2 weeks ago, when we were fully into our new cameras, I said to folks at home, I need some of you to help. We need you at home to be critiquers of our live stream. So here's a ministry opportunity for you. Here's a way you can be engaged with the rest of the congregation is, as you're seeing things in the live stream that you think we might do better, that we need to have a better camera angle. Are the sound quality is not high enough? Be my critiquers and send us your information and be engaged with the congregation with everything else that's going on. So the person that's in the back running the little device that everything's connected to can see everybody's comments from Facebook. So if someone says, hey, your picture's fuzzy or the sound quality is not good, we can see all that and try to remedy it right then and there. Or the next week, I spend the next week trying to figure out, okay, how do we make that aspect better? But this gives them ownership of the live stream, and it gives them a connection to what's going on in the church setting by partnering with us online.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Yeah, and I'm hearing that your understanding of membership, that you've had to think about what that means for you, what that means for the church. Sounds like it's sort of a constant evaluation, and you're always looking for feedback to do better. So
yeah.
that's exciting. So I'm wondering, did anything that Reverend Lori said, or just that initial question of what membership is to you, something that you want to share?
The thought that comes to me is that the essence of membership, and the essence is the same. How it is lived out is a little bit differently. And I think one of the challenges that we have, and I know it's a mental shift and a spiritual shift I'm working on, is the idea that one is better than the other, particularly being stuck in the idea that those who are physically present in a space are physically located in the same city or region are a different class, to use that terminology. There's this kind of classism, I think, that can happen in terms of how we approach this. And in my mind, the essence is absolutely the same. And the mindset needs to be one of those that are in our online communities being fully as much a part of the membership as those who are perhaps in the room or not in the room. And so it's a total rethinking in terms of the importance of all who are a part of making the community.
What stands out to me, Reverend Duane, is what you said, that the essence is the same. Speaking of a more traditional membership or a virtual, and it's not that one's better than the other. And I imagine that's part of the balance, right? Is to understand that it's not like, well, we can be a virtual member because this other maybe isn't possible, but that they're both valuable. There's something inherently good about both of those things. And so that's sticking with me, the essence. And it looks like we have a comment in the chat box. Wanda, is there something?
Yeah, in connection to membership, I'm not sure if anybody on the call or panel can address this. At one of the general conferences, we were talking about dealing with membership and pushed it off to the theology group and was never revisited. And so as we talk about virtual membership, I know that's one of the things you wanted to talk about later in the webinar. Should we address some of that now in connection to the governance?
Well, yes, and I think let's go there, because the next question, and maybe SJ and Andrew, from your perspective, you want to start off with this, but one of the questions was about what are some of the more church governance or logistical practical questions of membership that is both traditional in person and virtual. And so is there some, like, thinking about that, right? Like, is there something about the bylaws that we need to think about? Is there something about, Reverend Laura shared about different ways of tracking attendance? So what are sort of those more governance level questions about things that need to be, that as a denomination, we might want to consider as we think about this expanded idea of membership?
So one of the challenges that we have is how do you engage and gain commitment from people whose lives are completely chaotic? And it's not reasonable to expect them, when they don't use watches, they don't have phones, or if they have a phone, they'll charge it one week and not the next, to expect them to show up consistently in the same way. So we have a couple who do come to church. They every time, they reappear, but sometimes they show up 5 minutes before the end of the service, and sometimes they show up an hour early and then they leave. And I think what the point we've come to is we don't track attendance by names. We do it more by instinct and by trust.
Actually, on the ground, what I do is I have an app on my phone, because there is an app for everything, and I basically just hit the plus sign for every person that engages with us.
But we don't track individual attendance like
No.
a register.
No, we don't have a register. They don't have names, because most of them won't use their real names anyway.
So part of that is accepting that our membership role will always be much smaller than our cohort of regular attendees. And in contrast to the way other churches are doing their online, our online church is a Zoom meeting. And so actually our church service is driven by the Zoom attendance that is then actually broadcast to the in-person people, rather than the other way around. Because that allows us to focus on the pastoral care needs of the in-person community, rather than attempting to do two things at once there. And so it creates a slightly different mechanism. So one of the first challenges when we went into lockdown is, how do you do a church general meeting when your fixed location is the purple gazebo in the park?
Yeah.
Right.
And how did you answer that question? I'm curious, how did you handle a meeting when that was your location?
So we put the meeting on Zoom, and Andrew went to the purple gazebo in the park virtually. Well, he went to where the purple gazebo would be, ready to participate with whoever showed up. And the first time nobody showed up, and he sat there in the dark and the rain waiting for the nobody to show up. But the second time there were some other people that came to it. Part of it we found is working with people for what works for them. So what I would say is, in a way, the denomination's bylaws need to allow for that greater degree of flexibility, because what works for our church wouldn't work in Washington, D.C. necessarily, but what works for you in D.C. or in Harrisburg doesn't work for us. Because if we tried to do a register of people who won't give you their real names, I mean, I'm sure it'd be interesting to see how many Mickey Mouses there were, but it's not very informative.
Yeah. So I I think what you said about what works for you in your location wouldn't work somewhere else, and what works somewhere else wouldn't work for you, and how do our bylaws as a denomination make space for that? And that's a good question. And so I'm hearing this question in terms of like holding an annual meeting or maybe a board meeting. So I'm curious, maybe from some of the other panelists, how have board meetings changed for you? How have congregational meetings changed for you over the last 2 years? Or book studies? Lucille, you shared about doing a class, a monthly study. What has that changed with over the last 2 years?
Yeah, so right now I'm doing a Bible study on Wednesday evenings for the month of February. So as Reverend Laurie said, we do that hybrid. We do have the opportunity for people to log on online as well as in person. Since we are talking about attendance, I am tracking attendance for the Bible study. And one way I'm trying to generate interest in attending is I'm giving certificates to everybody that is completing this class. And I have different levels of certificates. So if someone comes to just one, they get a participation certificate. They come to at least three of the four, they get a certificate of completion. And if they come to at least three, and they schedule a meeting with me to discuss missions, they will graduate with honors. So it's just like a fun little way to try and generate interest to people to participate. And there is no distinction between those who are attending virtually versus in person. That attendance is valid either way. So I look forward to the handing out the certificates. I'm already imagining what that could look like to celebrate the accomplishment and the participation that people have done. So yeah, that's one way that we've kind of changed things with online and in person.
Another question that I thought about is when you hold a class and it's hybrid and you have some people who are joining in person and some that are joining by way of technology, how do you get those different sets of people to connect and to engage with each other when one, some may be in a building and some may be from their home? How have you tell us something, talk about that.
Yeah, so when I was we just had class yesterday, and we had people from West Virginia, from Pennsylvania, so we and Lancaster and Harrisburg, so different locations. And so there was some discussion about where this person was from, but towards the end of the class I realized that there was about half the room in person hadn't really spoken in the discussion. And so I made a conscious effort to try and involve them. So if it was the other way around and maybe some people online hadn't participated, then I would have made the conscious effort to try and involve them. But I think it definitely does take a little bit more critical thinking and teaching skills to be making sure that you're having everyone involved and not just maybe the people in person or just the people online.
Yeah, that's so exciting, and I'm really excited to hear about your certificates and your different levels and the way that hopefully gets people more excited. Well, are there other thoughts before we move on about other practical bylaw governance type things that or at least worth having a conversation about or just lifting up?
When we decided to make our decision of letting people just sign their names on Facebook, we didn't worry about changing the bylaws. We did add a little bit of procedural into our SOPs. We asked people, put in your name. If there are two of you in the same household and you're both watching, put in both your names. We gave leeway where if you're not comfortable putting your name on Facebook, here's our email address. Send us an email that says, hey, I watched the service. And we might even go until Wednesday. So we know that I have a gentleman that is a hotel manager, and I know he can't always watch at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. So he might be watching at 2 o'clock Monday afternoon, but he still signs in, and that counted because I needed to accommodate his work arrangements, but he still wanted to be engaged with with the church. And what I do is when I look at Facebook, and if there are people that have asked questions, I'll reply back to them with answers so that there's more of a connection with us. But the least concern I had was changing our bylaws. That was so unimportant to me. What was more important was to keep that connection between ourselves and the church as a whole and the people that make up the church.
And in our
There-
case, we did update our bylaws. And part of that was actually about intentionality and intentional inclusion, with the sense being, if we don't name our online community in the bylaws, and from a corporate perspective, it's almost as if they don't necessarily exist, or they're not acknowledged in the way they need to be acknowledged. So at our congregational meeting, which was totally online, we actually did go through and change the bylaws as a way of being very proactive in affirming those who are part of our online community.
I should
Can you
say the
give an example?
did
Oh.
vote on that change to the SOPs. So everybody was in
Yeah.
agreement that we extend this way of doing membership, and everyone was good with it. I don't think we had a single dissent to expanding how we look at membership so that we can include more.
Reverend Dwayne, I was going to ask, can you give an example of something that you changed in your bylaws to reflect this more expansive understanding of membership?
A lot of it was actually adding the word "and." It is not one being more, one being less. It is both "and." And so we went through in a lot of places where there was specificity around physical attendance in some way and such, and we added the word "and." And that's kind of the general piece. If anyone would like a copy of our bylaws, if you send us an email, we can send those. You can take a look at that and see how we addressed it. But that was kind of, it wasn't a big revolution to our bylaws. It was more about bringing in this both and perspective with the intentionality around the, to use that word, the equality of online versus physical presence.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
exciting to hear. And it's a short word and it's a powerful word, right? So I wanted to ask, SG and Andrew mentioned something about pastoral care. So I wanted to ask this question to the panel about in this over the last 2 years with the pandemic and all of the changes that and opportunities it's brought to our church and our life. Talk to me about pastoral care. How do you provide pastoral care in this new reality where not everyone is in the building on Sunday or once a week, maybe when you can't get into hospitals to visit people? Tell me how has your thought on how to do pastoral care changed, or maybe it hasn't?
For us, it hasn't changed. And that's because a proportion of our pastoral care has always been done by phone or computer connection. In part because our congregation has always been, I'm going to say, quite spread out. The definition of spread out in the UK is different to the definition of spread out in the US, because we consider relatively small distances to be quite large when it comes to people traveling to do meetings outside of the normal Sunday time. So we've always had a congregation who've driven 20 miles to come to church, but they wouldn't drive 20 miles to have a pastoral meeting. So they would always expect that to have happened a different way. And so in some ways, we've created more connection with those people, because now what has happened is our midweek group has gone online, our social time is online, various other meetings are online, and therefore there is more connection with people in ways that are meaningful to them. And the people who do not do online and who just show up receive it the same way. But actually, because of the way that we deliver the service on a Sunday, there's more time for that. because the purpose of us being there on a Sunday and on a Wednesday is to have conversations rather than people sitting there and listening to a service.
So one of the major changes during the pandemic is that the local police named me as an essential worker and gave me a very nice letter to carry with me, so I didn't get arrested when I was doing stuff. And it really just ramped up the numbers of people I was seeing because so many other organisations closed down and stopped. A lot of them just closed their doors, you know, and walked away for a year or so. So I ended up catching a lot of overflow from other places, picking up a lot of slack. So that changed marginally how I do things. It meant I had to devote a lot more personal time to being out on the street during the pandemics and during the lockdowns. But on the other hand, the impact was that much bigger.
Yeah. Well, that certainly brings up a whole topic right there of is ministry being essential, an essential service, and that could be an exciting conversation too. So that's really cool to hear how you've been able to do that. So
Maybe I'm just too well known by the police.
that could be another webinar too, right? Other thoughts on pastoral care? Or
I spend a lot more time on the phone. For a while there, here in Harrisburg, pastors, unless you were on staff at the hospital as a staff chaplain, you weren't even allowed to go in and visit your own congregation. So we spend a lot more time on the phone. My congregation is really good at putting everything that's going on in their lives on Facebook. There's nothing secret about their lives. So I spend a lot more time checking what's going on in my members' lives on Facebook and then following up with what I see with phone calls. I spend a lot of time letter writing. I'm big into writing notes and thank you notes and how are you notes and all that kind of stuff. So I spend a lot more time doing that because doing the actual visiting was really curtailed. For my folks, when we first started going live stream, the folks that ran the soundboard, I gave them a letter saying they were essential to our service. So if they got stopped traveling through the city on their way to church, they would have a letter from me saying, this is an essential member for our worship service to be live streamed so that they can come to. And I gave one to my associate pastor. So if there was some kind of emergency, he had something. So I provided letters to our folks to enable them to do the ministry they needed to do.
wow, an innovative, quick thinking way to do that.
Mhm.
I just want to say, if you have it in the chat box, we see Reverend Jeff from MCC Toronto shared that they created an online pastoral care request form, and there's a link. Looks like you can follow that and check that out. And goes on to say, you know, that's the way that they're encouraging their people to request that. So take a peek at that after this. So I see another question in the box about a couple of people were asking about service. And so someone asked, so they'd like to hear more about service and hands-on missional activities. And like, I'm reading this as, you know, how do you get people engaged in service and mission type activities in this new reality? And maybe Lucille, that's a great question for you, because it seems like that's your area.
Yeah, so every month we get together and we discuss what does it mean to live out our faith wherever we are. This next month here in February, Reverend Lori brought up a great question we're going to dive into is how do you share your faith and talk about your faith in the workplace when a lot of workplaces say you can't talk about your faith. So, you know, we're going to be discussing that more. And I think part of it is also just showing your faith and not maybe telling your faith. So making that meal for a coworker who is sick, maybe they do have COVID, and you can support them by making a meal. My mom is a great service person. She is always doing things like that where she's making meals for people. Little notes for your coworkers. That's another great way to engage people. To remember that, our places of influence is not just where we work, but it could be our homes, our neighbors, maybe a place that we volunteer, and even our own church is a place that we can be serving others. So a lot of times in church, we spend a lot of time teaching people and preaching to people, but we don't always spend a lot of time discussing how to live that out in our life. So the small group that I'm having is more of a peer support kind of group, where we're helping each other discover ways to live out our faith. And recently someone just had a light bulb moment and figured out maybe some ways that he can use his more economic abilities to help people during tax time. And so it's really creating unique experiences for each individual, just to kind of say, go out there and be light. Doesn't really help individuals figure out how they live that out individually. So I think what's really important for membership is to help members individually discover what their purpose is, what their reason they are here on life. So that takes time, that takes relationship, it takes a conversation. And we can do a lot of that prep work in our worship service, where we kind of plant the seed of what it means to be serving others. But it really does take a conversation and mentorship and discipleship, some kind of old school words there, to really help people discover what their calling and purpose is.
Wow. That's really exciting. And the way that you're able to individualize, kind of with like an individual plan, right? To help someone to figure out what their gifts are, what their interests are, and then how they can use that to meet a need in the world. So that's really exciting. Reverend Dwayne, I'm wondering about, is there something in DC, ways that you all are looking at service or mission or being out in the community?
I really like what Lucille just shared, and I wrote something down, and it is serve where you are. And I think this is another area where the intentionality is so important, because, for example, if we're constantly promoting what you in DC can do, go to Freedom Plaza and do this, go here and do that, and that becomes all the messaging, then those who are in other locations are automatically left out of that conversation. It's not about me. And so I think part of what I need to work on, what we need to work on, is when we offer the local opportunities for engagement, that we also offer suggestions or ideas on how anyone anywhere in the world can be a part of doing the same thing in their own place or location where they might be. If it's advocacy, of course, they can do it right there on social media and all the various platforms for that. And so in DC, there's the Transgender Day of Remembrance. There's lots of things that we invite people to be involved in, to support our Share Card program, those kinds of things. And some of those are things that people can support in various ways from where they are, or do something similar in their own neighborhoods, in their own homes. So again, I think all of our communication, filtering it through this idea, how are we really having a full message of including, and not just seeing the quote unquote physically distant or online community as just observers, but actually participants and servers. And some of the language we use the term border-free worship, border-free ministry, as opposed to the hybrid terminology, partly because, at least for me, hybrid feels kind of like cold language. Border-free, mechanical language. To me, border-free is talking about border-free between our different faiths. Border-free in terms of there being no borders between the walls of the church and the home. And in fact, if you're worshiping with us on the beach, there's no border in that way. And then also the international perspective. So the term border-free ministry and border-free worship not only is referring to the global perspective, but also theological and also the physical, that there is no border. If you're at home, you're as much a part of us as we might be right here behind the altar. And the altar extends to your home and create. And I think that's the other thing I would add is when we do this, we invite people to create worship space where they are. So when we light the candles on Sunday, we invite people to light candles where they might be. If they're at the beach, pick up something that reminds you of worship, so you're connected in some way right there where you are. So that's some of the idea of how do we bring all these concepts that were so meaningful before online and find new ways to create that meaning wherever a person might be. Worship where you are, serve where you are, be where you are, and where you are is also where we are because of this border-free idea, the altar that completely encircles the globe.
Yeah, the border free, that's just such a beautiful, image. And there's so much there, theological and political and all of that. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about specifically in DC, and Reverend Kathy, maybe you want to chime in on this, is just even within your own building, the way that you have worship now online. I think that maybe even the two of you, when you are leading communion, maybe you're not even in the same space in the building. Can you tell us a little bit about how you even place yourselves in the church and why you do it that way?
Well, certainly, we were having in-person we went to in-person service. The numbers started to rise, so we went back to completely border-free and online. Yet we were broadcasting from the building, and we wanted to give people an opportunity, those who were already familiar with the community, to be able to see and experience the church that they were familiar with, and those who were not familiar with the community, to see what the community inside the building space was like. And so to keep ourselves safe and to promote and to model the behavior that we were hoping people would also carry through with wearing masks and physical distancing, is that we broadcast from different rooms in the church. And so Reverend Dwayne is in the sanctuary. I'm in the waiting area where we've moved an altar. The musician is in the chapel. And because we have a space that enables us to be able to do that, to be able to model what we would hope the message would be, as well as continuing to bring the message to the community and beyond. And it's fun and it's exciting and it's lots of wires and and extension cords and cameras and computers running throughout the building. So if you ever get to see the back, it's fun, and you see it from online, and I believe it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've joked sometimes that if someone just came and looked at our space and said, "What does this church worship?" or "How does this church worship?" someone with no history of us would say, "Oh, it looks like they worship wires in this church." We do seem to have them everywhere, but yeah.
So I was also, in preparing for today, I was reminded. So I've only been a part of MCC for just over 2 years now, and so I went through baptism and confirmation in another denomination. But I was reminded of what I learned when I was in like 10, 11 years old in confirmation class, and it was that becoming a member meant that I was committing to giving my time, my talents, my gifts, and my service to God. And so that TTGS has always kind of stuck in my head. And it never dawned on me then that that might mean something outside of coming to a church on Sunday mornings or Wednesday nights for a Bible class or Thursday nights for the bell choir. But I guess in my own mind, what it means to be a member of a church has just expanded. It's sort of this both and so that's where I kind of wanted to jump to this question of expansion and engagement. So as we have this expanded, and maybe it's really not even the actual idea hasn't expanded, just the way that we look at it has expanded. But I would like to spend our last time together talking about the engagement piece. So with this expanded idea and understanding of what it means to be a member, how do you get and how do you keep people engaged? What does that mean? Tell us a story about something that's exciting that's happening in your community, about how people are engaging or re-engaging in ways that maybe 2 years ago they couldn't have imagined.
Well, that's pretty much I would say almost every week, but it's kind of a regular thing with us. We get so many people that would never set foot inside a church. They're suspicious of churches, they've been hurt by churches, or they're just dirty and smelly and think people will just, turn them away. So, and they come back sometimes months apart, and they still consider us to be their church. So I've never really thought about membership along the lines of the denominational guidelines, if you like. I've always felt that membership of our church is people who say that they are part of our church, and as Eshe said earlier on, we've got skateboarders who, when my volunteers didn't turn up, a bunch of 12 and 13-year-old skateboarders come over and unloaded the van for me and set up for me. So, a few years ago, they wouldn't even speak to us. So a lot of it is the fact that people know that no matter what, we will always be there. We will always turn up. And it's that, I don't know, it's not kind of steadfastness, I suppose. I don't know.
But there's also a completely separate thing that happens with what we do. And I just saw a question come up. Do people engage and stay engaged if they don't actually join? And one of the types of people that we found that we get engagement from is people who come and volunteer because they believe in what we're doing. So they show up every Sunday. They look, they watch, they listen to the service. You can't escape it. It's broadcast on a massive TV. They talk to the homeless, they talk to each other, and some of them go out of their way to do other things, and yet the only ones who can become members officially are those who were baptized as children, because most of them would not choose to be baptized now. They want to be part of the church. They're quite happy to be on any lists we have, receive emails, those that do that. But if you talk to them about baptism, it has such horrible connotations to them, they don't want to go there. And that would be one of the things that I think as a denomination we need to look at in a culture where generationally our skateboarding community, they don't know what church is. They show up and go, "Who are you?" And we say, "We're a church." What's one of those? I mean that's a whole, they're generationally, they're now 2 generations away from regular church attendance. Baptism is a completely alien concept that might come way, way, way down the line after they've been listening to the sermons and talking and singing the songs and joining us and talking about what we believe and why. But the idea that you have to go through a ceremony of baptism is just a bit alien.
Although we have done quite a few street baptisms.
Yes. Yeah. But it's often the people who are much older who want to be baptized because they feel that's the right step in their connection. But it's another step in a journey.
Part of engagement is providing opportunities. People will say, "Well, I didn't know that was something I could do," both in the church and I speak all the time about your service doesn't have to be here in this building. Go find something out in the community that interests you. Go volunteer somewhere. I've got a gentleman who's now volunteering. He is 89 years old and he's volunteering in his local fire department doing paperwork for them. So the firefighters don't have to deal with paperwork. And he's doing it for them. And that's his engagement with his community. So there are a lot of opportunities. We just engaged ourselves with, we have an organization here called Christian Churches United, and it's for 3 different counties, and they're a help ministry. And so they're a big, they've become a very big organization, but they're doing a project with a local owner of a laundromat to provide laundry services for the homeless. And we're helping out by providing the detergent. You know, we're collecting detergent pods and bleach pods and dryer sheets and putting little packets together. So when the homeless come in with their clothes, they can hand them these packets and say, here's your laundry detergent that you need. But this is another way for people to engage. They might not think about, oh, well, when I go to the store and buy my laundry detergent, I'll buy an extra package and give it to the church to use for the Laundry Angel program. So we try to find, for us, we try to find as many places where someone might want to get engaged, and we promote it. I also let folks know how am I engaged as their senior pastor? How am I engaged in the community outside my work with the church? As an example that, yes, we can find places in the community. So I've worked on boards and organizations in the community that really have nothing to do with my church work, but it's showing others how I can be engaged and how they can be engaged in doing things in the community. That is just as much a service as being an usher on Sunday morning.
Mhm.
And I see Wanda's question flag. And so I'm looking in the chat box to see, I see a question from Catherine. Is that the one that you're, yeah, so
And I think
Catherine,
the first part of it would be great for Lori, based on what she just said.
yes. So the first part of that question is, if we expand our thinking and engage people online, and that is how they live out their membership, how do we maintain the in-person as well? Because that's a lot of work for smaller churches. Do you have any thoughts on that balance? I'm thinking,
Are you
go
saying,
ahead.
how do I stay connected with those that join us online?
no, I'm wondering, I'm thinking, Catherine, that maybe you're asking about sort of the workload, that it is a lot to do both and to do both well. Is that, Catherine, am I reading your question right there? Yes, the workload. So just any tips on how you balance, because online on its own is a lot, in person a lot, and doing both together well is a lot.
Okay, I'll say that I make sure I have my day off because it is exhausting. My board and my church staff here know that Wednesday morning I have a weight issue, so I go to a weight support loss group, and that meets every Wednesday morning, and they know that that is my time, and I will not be in the church Wednesday morning. I will be at and I consider that part of my own self-care. So I let other people know that I'm doing so that they can see that I'm practicing self-care just as they need to take care of themselves. So it's making sure that I have that time for my own self-care, time for my relationship with my wife, because we've now been together for 37 years. But that doesn't mean that we need to still take care of each other. And then having that time, that concentrated time of making sure I'm engaging with my folks, whether they're online or face-to-face. The telephone's a good tool,
Yeah,
you know,
thank you.
but it's always setting up that time for self-care that is so important for a pastor to,
Yes.
you know, to put it on your calendar, just like you put any other appointment on your calendar. Put on your calendar your appointment for self-care so that you do it.
That's a good message for all of us, right? And I'm just continuing. So as we can continue in our time together, if you have other questions that you want to ask or to have addressed, please put them in the chat box. We'll do our best to get to those that we can. I'm scrolling through now.
The second part of Catherine's question is a finance team question. So I will pass it on to them. I don't think we've had other questions. We've had
Okay,
mainly
so
comments from people about
just
what they're doing
checking.
in their churches.
Are there other thoughts from the panelists on this engagement question before we move to sort of wrapping up?
I thought about engagement is just that membership outside the church, whether it be Amazon or Netflix, if you become a member of that, a lot of times people are thinking about the service they're receiving. And so what we're talking a lot about today is the service that people are giving. And so I think probably for membership engagement, it would also be good during the membership training to explain what membership is and the service aspect of it. And then after people become members, it's, making sure that we are having that relationship to make sure that we are providing unique opportunities for them to be serving. Because I think a lot of times when people hear membership, especially outside the church, they're going to be thinking about the services they'll be receiving. So I think there is a educational aspect to work through there. But I think it also is an opportunity to maybe rediscover what membership means and what services can we offer our members. Not only are we expecting them to be serving their church and serving their community, but what can we as a church be offering to our members that may be something that really would entice them and want them to be a part of the church? Are we offering vocational training? If they want to go back to school, do we have scholarships available? Are we helping people with medical bills? Do we have a slush fund to help people with that? So these are maybe services that would be available to members that the people who are maybe just attending wouldn't be able to receive. And that brings up a whole other question of how do you not be exclusive? So if you're offering certain benefits to members that you're not offering to your general public who are attending worship, you don't want to have this like, oh, well, you're not a member, so you're not as important around here. So that's a whole other question. I think there would be a whole other webinar. But I think that is a challenge for me as I look towards ordination, is not only helping individuals discover unique ways to be serving their church and their community, but discovering unique services we can offer our members.
Yeah, you lift up an important sort of delicate balance, right? Or this question of membership comes with some privileges. It also comes with expectations, but also how do we not create, categories where somebody, because of, a piece of paper, has an opportunity to get things that others don't. So Karen asked a question about baptism, and I did not scroll back far on. Karen, would you mind re-asking your question just so I can get it to the top of my list?
I got it. I found it. It's the question for the theologies team.
Can we
She
throw it
says,
out there just to see?
Will there be a response from the theologies team about baptism this July?
Oh, yes. Well, not being on the theologies team, I'm not sure what they would say, but it sounds like just from our conversation here today that the question of baptism and its relationship to membership is something that people want to hear more about. So we will certainly take that question to the theologies team and find that out.
And I'm just kind of thinking out loud on that particular question about for those who opt into baptism, I'm using that language for those for which that's a meaningful, and we have had a request that we're working with. How, again, do we offer that in a way that someone across the world can also participate in that? So I'm just immediately thinking out loud here, but one thought that comes to me is for those who wish to participate in that, to actually invite wherever people are to have water, to have a bowl of water, a vase of water, so that wherever people are in the world, when we're offering baptism, they can actually touch that water themselves. Again, just thinking out loud, bringing the practices into where people are from that border-free perspective. The water in your home, and of course, if someone's at the beach, they can just go put their toe in the water at that moment or whatever. But thinking about when we do a ritual, it is not just within the walls. It expands. I love the word, someone used the word expansiveness a bit ago. I love the word expanse. Expanding that to those who wish to participate. And then I think at that time, we also need to use language that remains welcoming for those who come from other spiritual and faith traditions, and for those who perhaps have been a subject to baptism abuse. I have been asked to ritually undo baptisms from some who were forced into baptism particularly some First Nations people who were forced into baptism. So I had to think of a way, how do you, and they asked, how can you undo the baptism? So taking all of those dynamics into consideration with this conversation. So I think the baptism piece is a rich one, and I hope the theologies team will also look at the online component of that.
Well, we will certainly pass that question or that topic along. So we started today. I asked you all to introduce yourselves and tell us something about membership that excited you. And as we start to sort of ramp down our time together today, and one of the things that I've heard in the questions that I've heard in the responses is that these last 2 years have been a challenge collectively for the whole world, particularly for churches, particularly for MCC churches. But I think also in these last 2 years, we found opportunities. We found new ways to try things. Maybe we actually returned to something that we had thought about before, but thought maybe we can't really do that. And the pandemic allowed us to maybe try that. So I would ask you as sort of like our closing question. The opening question is, what's one thing that excites you about membership? And I guess my closing question for you is, what's the next conversation in your mind? Like if we were to host a webinar in 3 months on the question of membership, what would the subtitle be for you? What's the next question, the next topic in membership for MCC to explore?
Well, for me, it'd be barriers to membership, because there seems to be, you have to jump through hoops to become a member, or you have to already, as SJ said, be baptized. And I just don't understand why there are barriers to people becoming members. I mean, we call ourselves a fully inclusive church, and in MCC Brighton, we say we're fully inclusive, and we don't actually stop anyone from coming in. You know, anyone can join us, anyone can be a part of it, and we've very loosely interpreted the membership stuff so that people can be members if they want. And we shouldn't really need to do that, surely.
Thank you.
We don't even when we do require that people are baptized, nobody asks for a baptismal certificate as evidence. And I tell you, personally, my baptism certificate resides in my parents' safe because I was baptized when I was 5 months old, and it's part of their records. It's not something I would expect to produce for anybody. So if it's unenforceable legally, does it really work? Aside from the theological point, but our bylaws are legal documents, so we do have to think about that.
I would love the next conversation to be about decentralizing membership from worship. If a church is offering Bible studies and choir and different services to the community, I would love to see individuals, whether they're online or they're involved with just one specific part of the church, that they can still be a full member of the church, and not to see that you have to come on Sunday morning. Because I remember at MCC the Spirit, sometimes we had people involved in Bible study, but they didn't come on Sunday morning. And as was just mentioned, that's a barrier. So we want to remove those barriers, that if you're a part of one part of the church, that you're no less a member of the church than if you don't come on Sunday morning.
Maybe it's time to allow the people on the ground to decide what constitutes a member.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Probably for me, the next question is, can we just get rid of the criteria altogether? And if someone wants to say, I am part of this church, that's for them to decide, not for us, the church hierarchy, to decide. If someone comes in and, has been active and wants to be engaged with the body of believers, they say themselves, I am part of this body of believers. And that's the end of it. That's the whole thing. Because even, I think of some of my regular attendees. I mean, I have a couple that are in their 80s and they've been coming to that church for years. And they didn't realize, they thought all this time they were members of the church and didn't realize they had to go to a formal membership class. And all these years they thought they were members of the church because they came and they were engaged and they called it their church home. For them, that was enough. And maybe that should be enough for everyone, that whoever says to someone else, this is my church home, that makes them part of the church. And it doesn't need to have that title to it of membership.
But the Church of England in the UK has a concept called the electoral roll, which essentially is the register of people who are eligible to vote. And so it's done by essentially completing a form. You fill in a form that says, I live here, or you don't even have to, if you live close enough to the church, you don't even have to show up. If you live outside of the area, you have to show up. But you self-declare and then they do a review. But it does have to, but that's how you maintain a kind of voting register. It's a different way of doing the voting register. It doesn't require membership services and certificates and membership classes in the same way. It assumes that if you are committed to the church in some way, shape, or form, you don't, then those things are covered somewhere else. Not saying it's the perfect answer, but it's a different way of looking at it.
I think the thought around removing barriers is important. And in that conversation, to look again at what the essence is, because I think there is a piece of becoming a part of something greater than oneself that has meaning. I do think that accountability remains part of the conversation. So bringing all this into the mix, the topic that kind of came up to me was creative connections. And looking at the removing of barriers as part of that, and finding ways that, again, offer that opportunity while really looking at it. And I'm taking an important step here. We're taking an important step here. This is life-changing. This is transformative. And so that's another piece of it. We're moving into to something that perhaps includes having a voice and a vote. And beyond that, what is the real meaning behind that? And how do we open that in ways? So I think the other piece in all of this is that continued conversation. I really have never liked the term social distance. We're socially distancing. And I think that has reinforced this idea of isolation and fear. So we're physically distanced, but we are absolutely not socially distanced, nor are we spiritually distanced. So I think the language we use is also real important. So much of this is a language thing. Even when we talk about membership, is that really the adequate word? Or is there another word that more fully describes this idea of transformation in community and belovedness in community?
I would like to explore a conversation around what does belonging look like if we no longer use membership as the term. And one example we've got two examples. We've got somebody who has been consistently volunteering with us for about 18 months, but she doesn't feel able to commit to membership because she can't do any more than come 3 Sundays a month. And psychologically, and it's not anything we've required of her, but she thinks that membership requires more than that. And the opposite end is that we have a teenager in our church who was desperate to become a member. because that would be the recognition of her belonging to the congregation. She's been on our worship planning team for probably 18 months, but she had to wait until her 16th birthday to become a member, because we have no way of recognizing the membership of youth, children, whatever, or indeed anyone else who doesn't meet the criteria. But you know, she had to wait till she was 16, which she found quite ridiculous, as you do when you're 15 and you're desperate to do something. But I couldn't fault her commitment. She showed up to every service. She's at every Bible study she can fit into. She goes to all the social events. She's in our Pride Parade and has been for 2 years before they got stopped happening.
Helps out on the street after school. Yeah.
Yeah, all of these things, you wouldn't, if you were looking from the outside, you would say she is a member of the organized, but we can't recognize.
That's an important question. All of these things that you have listed for next possible webinars, I have taken copious notes, and so I'm sure you'll be hearing from again some of my colleagues on the staff. But I just want to thank our panelists, but also just thank each of you that came and the ways that you're willing to engage in this conversation, in these questions. For me, I'm excited. If you've ever been in a meeting with me, Reverend Marcia can attend to this. I like to ask questions, and so I just get excited just about people that are willing to come together and ask questions and to think about things and